on this computer. I am recording now. Okay, as always, let me ask any questions, any comments? Yes, Anton, please go ahead.
Comment and a question. The question is, when you talked about unemployment in the last video for Friday, do they measure unemployment the same way as not just people unemployed, but have to have looked for work recently?
Yes, Anton, the definition in Mexico normally mimics what we do in the US. However, the data collection is not as accurate as what we have here. So normally, unfortunately, people read the Latin American statistics, like in Mexico, with a grain of salt, because the level of trust is not the same. Now that's Mexico. In some other Latin American countries that have less developed data collection mechanisms, I'm thinking about places like Nicaragua, Haiti, smaller countries, the measurement challenges are even higher, right? But in general, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They just look at, what, say, the BLS is doing for the US, and they normally try to do something similar. Not every country, not all the time, but most of the time. Now, keep in mind that here in the US, if you look at the BLS, we have at least 6 different ways to measure unemployment. I think they are called U1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I don't remember which one I believe is U3, the measurement that we follow here for the regular unemployment numbers. So, I mean, this just tells you the level of sophistication that we have developed over time in the US, which in Latin America doesn't exist. Now, the other problem is that here in the US, we do not have the same level of underground informal economy. I mean, now and then you find street vendors and street performers in some remote locations, but it's not like in Latin America. So it's hard to count these people as unemployed because they generate money, sometimes full-time. I mean, what I'm saying is that the challenges in Latin America are very different. So perhaps the tools that they use must be modified to accommodate for the unique characteristics of the labor market or labor markets in Latin America. That's my best shot as an answer, Anton.
That works. I was just wondering if I could compare the numbers, or when I saw the number, one felt like really low and then another one a little higher. I'm not quite remembering what you had said.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't think the numbers are comparable, even though in some cases they may use exactly the same formula, because the underemployment or the informal employment in Latin America is way too important relative to what we have in the US. Yeah.
And then my next thing is more of a comment. Have you heard of technological unemployment? You sort of alluded to it in your video.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of progressing technology causes unemployment.
Yes, Anton. In other classes, we learn, and this is coming from a very famous economist by the name of Joseph Schumpeter. He spoke about the creative destruction, right? So yes, technology can destroy some jobs, but can create new jobs. So I don't remember if I mentioned this in the video, but let me do it now. So it is true, for example, that with automation, robotization, you may be displacing a large number of unskilled workers that used to do a very mechanical thing that now can be used by a robot or some sort of machine. So you may be able to substitute 20, 50 unskilled workers with 1 engineer or 2 engineers to maintain and operate the equipment. So you destroy 20, 50 unskilled jobs, but you create one or two highly skilled jobs. So that's the idea. Some people argue that the destruction in terms of numbers is higher than the creation in terms of numbers. And in my example, that seems to be the case. But when you think about the new industries, complete new industries that new technologies are going to create, I don't know that in the aggregate, we can say the same thing. Sometimes I joke with my daughter that, I ask her, what are you going to be when you grow up? And she said, I don't know that. Well, you may be, one of those people attending flights, but not, on Earth. I'm talking about space traveling. You may be a flight attendant when we are traveling to Mars. Things like that. The point is that right now we can talk about, well, actually we cannot, because we don't imagine them there. But I anticipate that there is going to be a large number of professions and occupations that right now don't exist yet. So I don't know if I'm making any sense, Anton. The point is that in my example, yes, you destroy more than what you create in one particular setting. But in the aggregate, in the near future, once we have new industries, there is no destruction, just creation of new employment opportunities in jobs and positions that right now don't exist. Well, we don't exist in our minds. We don't talk about them, but I'm thinking people at the cutting edge of technology and innovation. I'm talking about people like Elon Musk and all these guys that are really at the forefront of thinking beyond the average. I'm sure they already have ideas of what the new professions are going to be and the names and things like that. But so anyway, very quickly, the answer is yes. But we still have to learn a lot about how this creative destruction power of technology is going to look like, Anton. All right. Thank you for that question and that comment. Appreciate that. Any other question or comments, guys? Yeah, just one final thing, just because I want to make sure that we put in the context, these comments in the context of Latin America. Remember, one of the ideas in terms of neoliberal policies is, free markets and the free transmission of goods, services, resources. But when you think about the free transmission of technology and knowledge, is a very different thing. This is why countries like the US, European countries, and those at the leading edge of technology are very interested in developing global property right mechanisms to protect intellectual property, because they don't want to invest billions of dollars in new technology that some people in China or in some Latin American country, they are just going to break it apart, reverse engineer it, copy, and take advantage commercially, exploiting this invention or this equipment that they didn't spend billions of dollars on, right? So I think the point I'm trying to make is that somehow, if they achieve this goal of some sort of patent system at the global level, with the ability to for a supranational entity to enforce the regulations, because right now we have the US patent system, but that has no bearing on China or India or any other country. This is why you have Gucci bags or some pills for medicine or equipment that are copies of the original. And this is why, again, they don't want that to happen. So Latin America traditionally and unfortunately has been really, really behind catching up with technology. So we in Latin America typically are, second, third, or fifth place in learning things that are 10 years, 15 years old. Not in every case, not in every industry, But for example, I remember in medicine, construction, in many Latin American countries are so way behind, way behind. You know, I remember a few years ago talking about a CT scan or MRI, and talking about medicine with some people in Latin America. They don't even know, they didn't know what that meant. You know, it's like, what? So, you know, things like that, you know, it takes time for technology and knowledge to be transferred across the globe. And this is going to be even more difficult if intellectual property mechanisms or a global patent law is passed. We don't have one yet, but again, the rich countries like the US are in pursuit of that type of thing. It's going to be an interesting world for sure, guys. And you're going to be living a fantastic world, you know, and once you are out there, professionally speaking, hopefully with degrees in economics and whatever degree you have, because it's going to be a rapidly changing landscape. So, yeah. Anyway, I think I'm going to start sharing my screen, because today we are going to start a brand new section. Okay, this new section has to do with the relationship, historic and recent relationship of the US and Latin America. And depending on who you talk to, you may, you know, find people that qualifies this relationship as, you know, tough love. Some of them are going to say, oh, no, that's a very violent relationship. No, that's a very abusive relationship. No, that's a very generous relationship. So it depends on who you talk to and which side and which country and which period of time you're talking about. But in general, I would say that the relationship historically has been a rocky, very, very tense relationship between the US and Latin America. Simon, or Simón in Spanish, Simón Bolívar, the guy that I am quoting here, you know, is the equivalent of George Washington here in the US, you know, the liberator from the British. But Simón Bolívar is a hero for 4 countries in the Andean countries, specifically Venezuela. Anyway, a major figure in Latin American history. This is a quote. The United States appears to be destined by providence, with a capital P, to plague Latin America with misery in the name of liberty. Now, look at this. We're talking about 2 centuries ago, right? 200 years ago, this guy that is considered a hero in Latin America was referring to the US in these terms, right? So this is the goal of this section, is to give you at least a basic sense, because we could spend an entire semester going over the US relationships and Latin America relationships. There are classes, probably at Fresno State, that deal with these things. But anyway, so the point of this is to give you an idea that almost since the moment from independence. Now remember, the last country in Latin America to achieve independence was in 1824. So from that moment, the US saw Latin America as a region where they should expand this sphere of influence to establish some sort of control, commercial interest, because it was in the best interest of the US. Again, commercially, politically, militarily, geopolitically, you know, think we're going to talk about Cuba, the missile crisis, the Soviets, and so forth, right? Now, this behavior, we're talking about 200 years, guys. So this type of relationship has been has gone through different stages or phases, to different times in the U.S. history. You know, from the early 1800s to the early 21st century. So we will talk about these things briefly. Now, many scholars like to espouse to a particular reason to explain this behavior, this attitude of the US towards Latin America. and they like to go behind a particular argument. For example, the first argument has been this is inevitable. The natural law of social evolution automatically leads to higher civilizations to conquer and rule primitive civilizations, right? Thinking about, well, obviously the US has been more advanced, commercially speaking, militarily, technologically speaking. So it just makes sense that a more powerful entity is going to dominate a less powerful entity or region and region, US, Latin America. The other argument has to do with security. Well, you can read this on the screen. Self-defense requires the US to control Latin America because in many cases, either because of innate and antagonistic nature of Latin American countries, or because the influence of other agents like the Soviets, or more recently the Chinese, or from the Middle East, or wherever, the US has to be careful because Latin America is right here in your backyard, in your back garden. So especially Mexico, that is used like the bridge that connects Latin America with the US. So we are talking about communism, we are talking about drugs, most recently terrorism, but also other type of threats. And number three, many people in political economy spouses the idea that this is just altruism, that the US is only trying to expand this control and dominion because they want to spread good, liberty, freedom, democracy, human rights, the benefits of the American culture to the rest of the world, right? Okay. Sometimes it's hard to pin a particular explanation to whatever event. I guess at some point it's a combination of all these three and perhaps other explanations. It's clear that if you have a more powerful entity, well, it's going to exercise some dominance over the less powerful. I get that. There is also this security element. You need to protect your interest, obviously. And of course, there is also this idea that, if we believe that we are doing something good, we want to expand it. We want to make sure that they take advantage of this anywhere in the world, right? So, if you ask me, hey, Professor Avalos, what do you think is, and again, we are going to be talking about this in a very different lens so that you understand, you can go back to this reading or to this particular box, and then you're going to say, oh, now I get what he was talking about. If you ask me, I think it's a combination of the three, right? All right. So let me keep going. All right. This whole conversation starts with President James Monroe. In 1823, 1 year before the last of the Spanish colonies gained independence, 1824, President Monroe basically pronounced this, now so-called Monroe Doctrine. By the way, it was not the president that coined this term. It was not the president that actually wrote the doctrine. It was the Secretary of State, Quincy Adams. But anyway, it's known as the Monroe Doctrine. And look at this. I'm going to play a video in a second, but this is the basic idea. The president, as a matter of foreign policy, saw that this was the historical moment and a historical opportunity now that the Spanish colonies were out and the Portuguese, the Spanish were out and that the Portuguese were out. It was the great opportunity to start expanding and exercising dominance in Latin America. So, the doctrine basically was a pronouncement that prohibited European states from further colonization in the Western Hemisphere. So you're out, don't come back. B, non-intervention no European interference in the affairs of hemispheric independent nations. And in reciprocity, the Monroe Doctrine said, we in the US, we are not going to interfere in the affairs of European colonies, of the remaining European colonies in Latin America. So you had some Dutch colonies, some French colonies. This is the French Guiana, the Dutch Guiana, and a few others here and there, but mainly French, Dutch. Those are the ones I remember right now. Anyway, and C, it rejected the extension or imposition of European political systems into the hemisphere. So we in the US are going to guard against the transfer, voluntarily or not, of policies and principles that are not in alignment with the interest of and policies of the US. So let me stop here for a second because I want to play very quickly. It's like a 2-minute video, but I think it's good for you to see it. So let's see really quick. Where is? I think it's this one. Share. There we go. Oh, you know what? I always forget to make sure that I am sharing this for the sound. Share sound. Bear with me, guys. All right, I think I got it. So here it goes.
During the first quarter of the 19th century, besides Mexico, almost every other important colony in Latin America gained independence from its mother country in Europe. However, as this occurred, certain powerful monarchies in Europe threatened to stamp out representative governments if they developed in the old colonies. That was the reason that in 1823, President James Monroe issued his now famous policy statement called the Monroe Doctrine. In it, Monroe warned the European powers that he would consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. In other words, the Monroe Doctrine warned the European monarchies that they could expect a strong response from the United States if they interfered with the affairs of any independent nation in North or South America. The ideas spelled out in the Monroe Doctrine were very important and continue to shape American foreign policy to this very day.
So very quickly, just wanted to show you this because it mentions, especially at the end, that although we are talking about a doctrine that was, pronounced 200 years ago.
In 1816,
hold on.
Monroe of the Democratic Republican Party.
My son is still going on. Sorry, guys. 200 years ago is still really current, as we will discuss. And we are going to go very quickly over different phases that this initial doctrine went through so that you understand what's happening today. And I am also going to share with you a list, because there are many other lists about the interventions, US interventions in Latin America, some of them political, some of them diplomatic, most of them military, some of them economic, some of them violent. But this is just unbelievable. And this is important for you guys, especially US students, to understand, because sometimes we don't comprehend, we don't grasp really well why many people in Latin America sees the US as such a bad actor, as a bad government, as abusive, and the antagonism against the US is very prevalent today in many Latin American countries, especially among some communities. And if we don't understand where this is coming from, well, we are never going to be able to solve it, right? So this is all I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to give you some hopefully unbiased picture of what happened since 1824 or 1823 with the doctrine all the way to today. so that you also start developing some interest into the historical and political components of these sentiments in Latin America against the US, us guys. I mean, I am American citizen now. I'm Mexican, but I'm American citizen too. So I vote and I talk to my Congress people and my representatives. I'm a member of the community. My family is, was born here. So it's important because well, think about this. I mean, we are marrying each other now. We have people from Latin America moving here, people from the US moving over there. We are having children together. I mean, we need to solve these things. I mean, we need to get some resolution to these problems because, well, they're not helpful. They are not helpful to anybody. Anyway, so let's continue here. Share screen right here. All right. So a few notes. Yes, anti-colonial motives were very important, but historians, and even if you study this from an economics point of view, you're going to realize that anti-colonial motives were important, but just secondary. One of the main goals of the doctrine was to incorporate Latin America within the sphere of influence, politically, economically, because they knew, the US, we knew that Latin America was full of natural resources. I mean, think about, again, we talk about this already, metals, agriculture, fishing, wood, all of these things in abundance in Latin America, right here in our backyard. So obviously it was very important for the US interest to create the conditions that were favorable to commercial interest. Now, think about this. They also knew that Latin America could be an important source of inputs, raw materials, but Latin America was also a very important source of consumers for US produced goods and services. So they never lost sight of this. They knew that Latin American countries can provide raw materials, but once we process them in the US, we could sell them back and they would be the consumers. So we can, if you will, forgive the expression, skin the cat twice, right? You could exploit this relationship in at least two different ways. Now, the doctrine evolved over time. For example, you can Google this online and you can get all sorts of documents about this. In 1845, you probably remember from your history classes that we had this war between between the US and Mexico about the territories of Texas and California. So President Falk in 1845 expanded the Monroe Doctrine by adding two things. It prohibited the external powers from interfering diplomatically into relationships between American states. So, okay, this is a problem between Mexico and the US. Get out. You have nothing to do here. You're French, you're British. Why are you doing here? This is between us, right? And B, extended the non-colonization idea by stating that Latin American countries could not accept voluntarily any European dominion, because what in many cases happened was that in order for, in the case of Mexico, to face the US, they would seek military support or economic support from European countries to be able to more or less balance. Well, the US said, no, you cannot do that. You cannot accept voluntary, or not, any type of assistance from any European country, right? This is totally, impossible. You cannot do that. Or else, right? That's the message. That's the message. If you try to do that, we are going to act, and the reaction is not going to be kind. And again, this is between the lines. They never said that in written words, but that's the message that they were sending. Now, remember that during the, those years, we're talking about the rapid industrialization, England, the Industrial Revolution. So the US was in growing need to access raw materials. And fortunately, the idea of military intervention was being substituted by a different type of intervention that had to do with commercial type of intervention, negotiation, control over land, control over resources, and things like that. So the US wanted to displace European industrial, financial, and commercial competition. That was the idea. Initially, it was militarily, but the US was gaining more economic power through technology, and therefore they were gaining spaces and spaces and spaces. In 1895, another problem, this time had to do with Venezuela. It was a territorial dispute because Guyana, a British colony, was it's still next to Venezuela. There was a dispute over the limits of the land. So Mr. Onley, the Secretary of State, expanded the Monroe Doctrine to add this. US interest as defined solely, that's just Washington DC, or the government, were legitimately the paramount interest in the Western Hemisphere, that any action to protect them was fully justified. So they were increasing the volume, right? And increasing the tone and the volume. And also, a few years later, we have the Cuba and Spain war, where the US militarily intervened Cuba, occupied Cuba for a while, and eventually, they kick out the Spanish in 1902. And remember, when I say the last Latin American country, with the exception of Cuba, because the Cubans have to wait until 1902 with the assistance of the US to expel the Spanish conquistadores. Then here is one of the most famous interventions in Latin America, because that was one that was very violent and gave as a product, the Panama Canal that we use for obviously commercial interest even today. So I think I mentioned this before. In 1900, Colombia and Panama were essentially a single country called Colombia. There was no Panama as a country. So Panama, if you look at the map, is the thinnest, the narrowest section of land connecting Central America and South America. So it was a prime location to build a canal. But of course, it was problematic because Colombians didn't want the US to establish presence there. So what the US did was to organize a revolt inside Colombia, basically trying to split the north, the Panama section, from the south. Obviously, they succeeded. And not only that, they created a new country that now we call Panama. The US occupied Panama, the Republic of Panama, and they proceeded to grant the US rights of the Panama Isthmus to build the canal, right? So, I mean, when things don't work commercially, when things don't work diplomatically, the US has historically always the resort of military force or, organize some sort of internal turmoil. The US, intervenes, solves the dispute, but it's not always in the best interest of those people, right? Let me stop here for a second. I want to play another quick video. Oh, I think I lost it. Let's see. Right here. This is like 3 minutes long, so it's not that bad. Let me play it for you guys. Because it's also important for you to see this, I think. So right here, share sound. There we go.
1923, President James Monroe issued the Monroe Doctrine, which outlined the United States foreign policy position that it would not accept any new European colonies in Latin America. After the Spanish-American War in 1898, the United States took steps to actually enforce the doctrine. We were able to do this with a combination of military and economic interventions in the early 20th century. First, we need to establish exactly where Latin America is. Latin America refers to the region of Central and South America and the Caribbean. In the late 1800s, much of America's foreign policy was characterized by a large U.S. presence in that region. Perhaps no president is more closely linked to Latin American intervention than Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt's famous quote, "Speak softly but carry a big stick," refers to the U.S. advancing and protecting its military, political, and commercial interests in Latin America, with the threat of military force if necessary. Roosevelt took the Monroe Doctrine a step further by adding the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. The Roosevelt Corollary stated that if Latin American countries' foreign or domestic policies threatened U.S. interests, then the United States had the right to intervene and settle any disputes. Critics of the Roosevelt Corollary argue that the U.S. was trying to act as the policeman of the Western Hemisphere. This is a characterization that Roosevelt had no problem with. Roosevelt's Latin American policy is perhaps most evident in the building of the Panama Canal. For many years, building a canal to open a passageway from the Caribbean to the Pacific was seen as vital for American strategic and commercial interests. The proposed site was the Isthmus of Panama, which at the time, in 1903, was part of the South American nation of Colombia. When the U.S. first proposed building the canal, the Colombian government refused. Unable to reach an agreement with them, the United States sent a warship to support a rebellion by the Panamanian people against the Colombian government. Soon,
just very quickly, guys, there is a typo on this thing. The name of the country is not Colombia, but Colombia. So just to make sure that I'm doing my job right here, this should be an O. Colombia, not Columbia. Anyway, minor thing, but just doing my job here. So
after Panama became an independent nation, the U.S. quickly negotiated a treaty with the new Panamanian government to build the canal. Construction began in 1904 and the canal opened in 1914. Now, American naval and merchant vessels could sail from the Atlantic to the Pacific much quicker. Throughout the early 1900s, the United States intervened numerous times in various countries throughout Latin America. In 1914 and 1916, President Woodrow Wilson sent American troops into Mexico in order to force dictators from power. Starting in 1915, U.S. Marines landed in Haiti and the Dominican Republic in order to maintain civil order. And in 1906, 1909, and 1912, U.S. forces went into Nicaragua in order to collect debt and force regime changes. In summary, beginning in 1898, in order to protect its commercial and political interests, the United States took an active role of intervention and influence throughout Latin America.
all right, so very quickly, one more, this is not a video, just a link. Let me put actually the link on the screen. Give me a second. I'm gonna put the link on the chat in case you want to see it on your own. But I am going to share the screen so that you can see. This is a list, not the list. I mean, there are other places where you can find additional places, but here is a list of, I don't know, 40, 50 different interventions throughout history, US interventions in Latin America. So for example, here on the screen, you have the Panama, the Marines landing in Colombia. Here you have the ones in Mexico. This is during the a Mexican Revolution. You can go more current. Let's say 1973 in Chile, where the threat was communism. So the CIA backed up this military coup that overthrew Salvador Allende we talk about this already, and on and on and on and on, right? So the point is that sometimes is because politics, like we want to protect against communism. Sometimes it's about debt. We need to collect some debt. Sometimes it's about foreign powers trying to establish presence, so kick them out. Sometimes it's about accessing resources. Sometimes it's sugar, like in the case of Haiti, or coffee. And sometimes, well, believe it or not, we have no excuse. So we need to create one. And sometimes we use that, okay, in the name of democracy or in the name of human rights, we are going to intervene in this country because they don't know what they are doing, right? They are practicing this uncivilized type of torture, for example, or they are abusing a particular segment of the population, and that we, as the US, the beacon of democracy and freedom, we cannot allow that. So we sometimes are able to well, create the necessary argument to go there, invade, and do whatever we need to do to advance our interests. Again, this is something that many people in Latin America don't seem to look in good light, because in many cases these interventions have been violent, have been abusive, have cost lives, and well, in the pure sense of sovereignty, these countries should be let to do whatever they want. I mean, they are independent countries. We are not, Latin American countries are not colonies of the US, but sometimes people feel that they are, because if they are doing something that is not appealing to a US foreign interest, well, they're going to get in troubles. And that's something that people don't like very much. And here is the other problem. Latin American countries sometimes perceive this type of US foreign policy as totally unfair, uneven, and other, more less kind adjectives. But for example, why is that? I'm just going to use the example of Saudi Arabia, where, well, the democracy obviously is not there. They have a kingdom. You have human rights violations. You have all of these things that in Latin America wouldn't fly at all. Yet the US is not going after Saudi Arabia. Why? Well, because they have lots of oil, and also Saudi Arabia is letting the US to maintain military bases in Saudi territory to control the Middle East and other things. So, it's in the eyes of Latin American people, it's a matter of convenience, not so much of principle. And that bothers them, in Mexico, in Bolivia, in Chile, in Argentina, in many people, I mean, things are changing again, and I'm really hoping that we can solve these differences at some point in the near future. But if you talk to people in general, they don't appreciate this type of treatment. Anyway, let me stop here for a second. So we have like 5 minutes or so for reactions, comments. Anybody? Too much? Too much information, guys? I don't know how many of you have seen this before or not, or how many of you have actually considered or were aware that this was happening. But anyway, if this is your first time, it's too much to process. I know that. Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, when you said when you said that the explanations that were offered to sort of justify US behavior was sort of a balance between the three, were you saying that it's a mixture of the three that they use to justify, or you think that or you see it as their motives?
No. I think first of all, it's not there. I talk about three reasons And I think it's a combination of these three reasons, what explains the behavior of the US, not necessarily in a balanced way, you know, 1/3 altruistic, 1/3, you know, no. I'm just talking about, it's a mix, a weird mix of the three. But when we talk about the reasoning publicly that the US displays in terms of justification, is always an altruistic motive. We are doing this in the name of peace. We're doing this in the name of human rights. We are doing this, you know, because it's in the best interest of the country or the region, you know, thinking about terrorism. But the point is that normally the US, well, I shouldn't say normally, but in some cases, the US uses this type of altruistic based type of justification to infiltrate into politics, economics, and many other spheres in Latin America that otherwise wouldn't be able to gain the space, because Latin America wouldn't voluntarily let these American, you know, economists, politicians, analysts, or police forces to enter Latin America. They would say no way. They would say no way. So yeah, the justification is typically always in the name of something positive. You know, it's diplomacy. Let me see, there is a question in the chat. Were there any domestic political factions that solicited intervention from the US? Oh yes, Dylan, absolutely. So, and this is why the Polk corollary basically says voluntarily, even if Latin American countries want to seek the assistance of European powers, you know, the French, the British, or anybody, the Soviets, or anybody else, they cannot do it. Because if they do, we are going to treat that as a transgression. We're going to treat that as a threat to US interest, and we are going to act in consequence. So yes, many in different episodes in history, like in Mexico, I think the Mexicans requested the assistance of the British, and the US said, no way, you have no business here. You know, you cannot assist Mexico. This is between the US and Mexico, get out, right? Or in the case of the Guyanas, again, the British, or the French Guyana, same problem. The Monroe Doctrine and the corollaries that came after, basically, they were threatening everybody else to intervene, whether they wanted to do it or somebody in Latin America was seeking assistance. They said, no way, we are going to treat that as a threat, and we are going to act militarily if necessary to kick you out. Yeah. No, I mean, we're talking about a very, very important pronouncement. And this is why the Monroe Doctrine is so important in political economy and foreign policy. And I mean, there are theses and books and many other things written about this pronouncement that, well, right now we're just touching upon, but very important for the future of Latin America, when I'm talking about 200 years ago, and for the US too, that is still current in 2021, guys. Yep, it's still current. Anyway, this is just the first section of 3 classes. So on Wednesday, I will continue with this, and I will conclude on Friday. Yeah. Yes, I'm here. I'll stay here. So stay here too, so I can talk to you. I'm talking to somebody else in the chat. So thank you, guys. I'm gonna stop recording now.